Hi, this is the show where you send in clothes that you've seen on the internet and then I try my best to recreate them. For a while now, I've been really wanting to make myself some longer length skirts that are both flattering but also really comfy. So when Cassie, last name withheld, sent in this photo of this skirt from Nasty Gal, I thought, perfect. I'm gonna try and make myself a jersey skirt with slits in the side. I then hopped onto Pinterest and I found so many other cute side slit skirts, some with 2 slits, some with just 1. I think the one I'm gonna make is just gonna have 1. Anyway, I immediately wanted to learn how to make one for myself because it actually looks like a pretty simple piece to construct, so it shouldn't be too hard to recreate for myself, right? Okay, so before we get to the DIY, real talk. This week is Fashion Revolution Week, which is a week dedicated to scrutinizing the fashion world, its practices, its ethics or lack of, its sustainability, and also to examine our own relationships with fashion. It started after a clothing factory in Bangladesh collapsed in 2011 and killed thousands of people. So many of the clothes that we see in our stores are made in really bad conditions, like the factory that collapsed in Bangladesh. Unsafe factories, underpaid workers. In addition, clothing is also pretty bad for the environment. It's estimated that 80 billion items of clothing are delivered out of factories annually, worldwide. Also, the amount of water it takes to make a t-shirt, 2,720 liters. That's how much water you drink over a period of 3 years. Clothing consumption, that is the clothes you buy per household, on average per year, uses up 1.5 tons of carbon, which is the equivalent of driving 6,000 cars. What the heck? So this is one of the major reasons that I either make my own clothes or mainly shop at thrift stores. Lately, I've also been wondering how I can make my impact on the world even less in my sewing, because fabrics, even cotton, still take up quite a lot of energy to produce, and it's often super hard to find out where the cotton was even grown. Was it picked using slave labor? How fairly are the people who are weaving and dyeing the fabrics being paid? So in this episode, I'm actually going to be using Thread International fabrics to make my skirt. So right up, I'm going to disclaim that this fabric was sent to me for free to try out, but all of the opinions about it are going to be my own. So what's awesome about this fabric is half of it is made out of plastic, recycled plastic bottles, which is so cool, and it also reduces the amount of water needed to make the fabric and provides jobs for unemployed people in Haiti, who are the ones who collect the plastic bottles and also convert it into useful stuff that can be made into fabrics. I want to know the science behind that. It's pretty cool. Anyway, Thread International is the most dedicated company I've ever come across in making sure that they address issues like slave labor and child labor at the place where most clothing brands have no transparency at all: the source materials. And then all the way up through all stages of production of the fabrics. They're completely transparent about how their material is made, which unfortunately is a total rarity in the fashion world. So shout out to Thread International for being awesome. Seriously, they're one of the coolest companies I have ever come across. So anyway, let's get started. First things first, I needed to figure out what type of skirt that I wanted to make. There's a few types of skirts that would work for this design, but I wanted the skirt to be really flowy and fall just below my knee, so I decided on a quarter circle skirt. Now it's called a quarter circle skirt because, well, the pattern is made from a quarter of a full circle. Basically, you just take this quarter of the circle and you make a skirt shape out of it using just 2 measurements, which we'll get to in a second. And this is what you end up with: a skirt piece and a waistband piece. So the 2 measurements that I needed to take for the circle skirt was 1, my waist measurement, and 2, the desired length of the skirt. Now it's time for some mathematics, but don't worry, I'll make this as painless as possible, so you just have to plug in your own measurements into the following equations. First, the inner circle. My waist measurement was 30 inches. Plug in your own waist measurement, centimeters or inches both work, in the following equation. So I took my waist measurement, multiplied this by 4, and then I added a 1/2 inch seam allowance on both sides of the circle, so basically add 1 inch to this measurement. Then I divided this number by 2 times pi, which is 6.28. So I divided 121 by 6.28. This gave me an inner circle measurement of 19.2 inches. And finally, because I'm going to be using stretchy jersey fabric, I'm going to take away approximately 3 inches from this measurement to allow for the stretch. So I rounded this down to 16. Now exactly how much you will take away will depend on how stretchy your fabric is, but it's better to take away more and end up with a smaller inner circle to start off with, because you can always cut this circle larger later on. Anyway, this final 16 inches gave me my inner circle radius. Next is the outer circle measurement. I wanted the length of my skirt to be 27 inches so that it would fall just below my knee, but again, you can replace whatever skirt length you want into the following equation. So 27 is my desired length. I added the inner circle measurement to this, giving me 43, and then I subtracted the waistband, which I'm going to add later, which I want to be 2 inches wide, so I subtract 2, giving me 41. And then finally, if you want to add hemming allowance, add ½ inch. But you don't have to hem if you're using stretchy fabric. I didn't bother to add a hem allowance on mine, so my outer circle is 41 inches. So to recap, on this quarter circle, the inner circle radius will be 16 inches and the outer circle radius will be 41 inches. Next, I wanted to draw this quarter circle onto real life paper, so I stuck a couple of sheets of butcher's paper together and then I drew both the inner and the outer circle measurements out from this corner of the paper using a tape measure like this. And remember that I said I wanted to add a waistband? Well, we will leave that part to later. Anyway, I cut out this quarter circle of the paper and I also gave the paper a little iron just to make it go a little bit more flat using a low heat setting, and then, well, I left it on the ground and my dog got to it. She thought it was a great place to go to the bathroom. Kinda my bad. I think she thought it was a puppy house training pad.
Ella, it's okay, I forgive you. I just think it's really funny. Oh man.
So I repeated all of that again and I made a second paper pattern. Next, I opened up my Thread International fabric. I got the Heather Gray jersey, which is one-way stretch, and first I pre-washed the fabric in cold water. Now, this is a non-essential, but I think important thing to do when you're sewing new fabrics. Wash them first if you want them to come out really nicely in the end. So yeah, I popped it in the washing machine and yep, I added way too much soap because I super know how to adult. Luckily, my washing machine didn't explode with soap suds, and after the fabric was all dried, I put it down onto my cutting mat with the stretch of the fabric going in this direction. No, okay. Place the pattern down onto the corner of the fabric, and then I used it to cut out an identical shaped piece of fabric. Now, because I'm using jersey fabric, the edges of the fabric like to roll over, so to get them to stop doing that, I sprayed on a little bit of spray starch and I ironed the edges flat. Oh, and the scraps of fabric from the inner circle here, they are going to my scrap fabric pile. I've stopped throwing out fabric scraps because this is hella wasteful, and I'm going to do a project with all of my scraps really soon. Anyway, back to the skirt. I thought it would be a good idea to make sure that the skirt is the right size, so I wrapped it around my waist and yep, it'll fit perfectly. Now, it's important to try it on before you sew because different stretchy fabrics differ in their stretchiness, and I'll give you tips for fixing it if it doesn't fit perfectly after you've cut it all out in just a second. So I laid the skirt down and I folded it in half like this, right sides together. And the next thing that I will do is to sew part way down this side to join the edges together and give it a side slit. Now, if your fabric wasn't as stretchy as mine and your skirt is a bit too small, you just need to cut the inner circle a little bit bigger. Or if it ended up a little bit too big, meaning your fabric was stretchier than mine, you'll need to sew it with a larger seam allowance, which basically just means sew it further in from the edge. Okay, so this is where the side slit, I don't know, I use them interchangeably, comes in as well. I wanted a fairly big side slit, so I only sewed 10.5 inches down this side. The longer your line of stitches, the smaller the split will be. To sew the fabrics together, I used a regular zigzag stitch, a ballpoint needle, and a normal sewing foot, although a walking foot would definitely help here, and I was very careful not to stretch either of the fabrics. Now this is important because you're sewing against the stretch on one edge and with the stretch on the other. So using lots of pins or clips and making sure that you don't stretch either of the fabrics while sewing is very important here. I then tried the skirt on again to make sure everything fit all right. Remember, there's also going to be a waistband above this, so it needed to fit on the lower waist. And there's the side slit there, which I am now going to hem the edges of. To hem the edges of the side slit, and this is optional because jersey fabric won't fray, just wanted to do it for aesthetic reasons. I folded them in about 1/2 inch, same as the seam allowance for the other stitches, and then I sewed down each edge of the slit like this. Now onto the waistband. I cut out a rectangle from the fabric that's 5 inches wide and 33 inches long. The length is my waist measurement plus 3 inches, just to be on the safe side, and because I wanted a 2-inch waistband, I made it 5 inches wide, adding 1/2 inch seam allowance to both the top and the bottom. I folded the waistband in half lengthways like this, and I sewed down this edge using a zigzag stitch. Then to get the correct waistband size, and I'm doing this because, as I said before, all stretchy fabrics differ in their stretchiness, and actually trying it on rather than just measuring everything will give you the best fit. I wrapped it around my waist, and I figured out where I'd need to sew by seeing where the pieces of fabric met on my waist. So I'm going to sew the waistband together here. I then cut off the excess fabric, and now I have a waistband loop. I lined this waistband up with the top of the skirt, raw edge facing up, and then I corded both of these with pins. This means that I put 4 evenly spaced pins into both the waistband and 4 evenly spaced pins into the top raw edge of the skirt. I then placed the waistband around the outside on top of the skirt, matching up the pins and the raw edges of both the waistband and the skirt's edge. And finally, I'm going to be sewing them together like this all the way around the waist to attach them to each other. Now, I'll go into this process a little more closely over here at my sewing machine. The waistband is on top of the skirt. Both are right sides together, and then I start at one set of pins and match up the next set of pins before sewing. Because you're trying to match up each set of pins, it might mean that you need to stretch either the waistband or the skirt a little bit more than the other. And then using a zigzag stitch, I carefully sewed along the edge towards the next set of pins. When I got to that next set of pins, I removed them, lined up the next set of pins, and so on until I'd sewn the waistband on all the way around the skirt. Then I flipped the waistband up, and it looked like this. And again, I'm not bothering to hem the bottom of my skirt because it won't fray and it looks fine. And now that I'm done, it's time to see, how did I go? Guys, I know I say this every time, but I am so happy with how this skirt turned out. It is both comfy, flattering, stylish, and super responsibly made. This is my personal DIY goals right here. I still can't believe that it's made out of 50% plastic bottles, and it's so soft and comfortable. It doesn't get sticky or hot like other acrylic fabrics like polyester either. Witchcraft, Thread International. Witchcraft. Again, if you want to grab some of this fabric for yourself to make your own skirt, or to use in any of the many other stretchy fabric tutorials that I've uploaded onto this channel, use the code FASHREV10 at checkout to get 10% off any of the fabrics. And also, let me know how you're going to acknowledge Fashion Revolution Week yourself. Maybe you can organize a thrift shopping trip with friends that have never gone thrift shopping before, or go for the first time yourself. Or turn your clothes inside out to show the label, then post them on social media and ask the brand who sold it, who made my clothes. Or maybe you'll just finally finish that sewing project that's been sitting in a dark, dank corner for years. There's a lot of ways you can get involved. You can go to this website here. I'm not sponsored at all by these guys. I just think that they're doing some amazing work for the world, and I think it's super worthwhile checking them out. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and I'll see you all next time. And don't worry, I haven't forgotten about episode 53.5. That'll be one of the next ones that I upload here. So, bye! Bye! Oh, no, we don't want to wave. We want to go for a WALK. Alright, let's go. Let's go for a walk. Thank you to all of my supporters on Patreon for making these videos possible. To become a Patreon supporter, go to patreon.com/Annika Victoria.